is behind, the world ahead, and there are many paths to tread, through shadow to the edge of night, until the stars are all aligned. Mist and shadow, cloud and shade, all shall fade, all shall fade.
Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today we're going to be talking about a very cool sort of mid-range optic. I wouldn't really call it budget because it is sort of in a price above that, or a price point above that, I should say. But before we get into that, if you'd like to help out the channel in any way, you can of course like, share, and subscribe, because all that sort of stuff helps and it's free. And you can also comment down below. Comment literally anything down below and you will help me out in the YouTube algorithm. On top of that, there's also Subscribestar, which is basically just a pro to a Patreon, where you send me money every month and I send you additional content and enter you in giveaways. There's also steel targets, AR500 steel plates. I have all of them in stock currently and they are shipping, though they will probably be out of stock again fairly soon. And on top of that, I do want to say thank you to Gun Deals. If you don't know, Gun Deals is basically just a website that collects the best deals in the industry, and you get to browse them for free. They don't add anything to the cost of what you're buying. They just simply find the best deals posted by users, dealers, and basically anyone who has access to it. And on top of that, I have been creating exclusive videos for them over there on their YouTube channel, because they're trying to grow out their YouTube channel. So if you want to go ahead, subscribe to their YouTube channel, you can also check out some of my additional content that's on there. I think I have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 videos at this point. Also, they've been bankrolling my ammo budget for a lot of my videos, and on top of directly supporting this channel. So if you guys want to help me out by helping them out, go ahead and subscribe to their YouTube channel and check out their website. Again, it's just Gun Deals. They don't sell anything, they merely find the best deals in the industry. So with all of that out of the way now, let's go ahead and talk about the Holosun 503CU. Now, that's a mouthful, and you might not know off the top of your head what that means, but basically there's a couple different series of Holosun optics. The 4 series has a single reticle option, generally just a dot. And the 5 series, or the 500 series, generally has multiple reticles. So in this case, you have 2 reticle options. So this is actually a 2 MOA dot and a 2 MOA dot with a 65 MOA outer ring, which is basically just identical to the EOTech reticle. So if you're a fan of the EOTech Donut of Death, this optic also shares it. Now on top of that, the C and the U, the C is for the solar on top, I believe. The B has no solar. The C does have a solar panel on top, so this is a solar optic. On top of that, the U is like for uncovered or for up armored or something like that, which just means that the turrets are very nicely encased in the hard aluminum of the body. Now, I'm talking about the basic boring specs and features and stuff. It is a 20mm objective lens, which is very standard for red dots. It's going to be the identical tube size. It's about the same length, about 2.5 to 3 inches long. With this mount that they include, I believe they only have, or included I should say, the lower 1/3. So if you're using the standard mount, which we will talk about quite a bit in this video, it is going to be a lower 1/3. What that means is, of course, if you're using your iron sights, if I can get this front one up, that the iron sights sit in the lower third of the glass, leaving the dot free and clear up top, so it is unobstructed. Now the MSRP for the red dot is $300, or like $301.94. It's some weird number like that. On the street price though, they're generally about $250 to $260. Now I do want to say that I did not pay for this optic. However, it was not sent out to me by Holosun. It was actually sent out to me by Delta Team Tactical, and we'll be doing a pretty nifty video on this setup fairly soon. So you're going to want to subscribe to the channel. But I did not pay for this, but again, I don't have any affiliation with Holosun or any really optics manufacturer at all for that matter. So like I said earlier, it's not really a true budget optic, as I purchased two EOTech 512s and I purchased both of them secondhand for $300, and this is awfully close to that EOTech price point. Again, it's a little bit cheaper, but it's not quite true budget like the SIG Romeo 5, SIG MSR, Vortex Crossfire, Vortex Spark is even a little bit cheaper. So this does stand in a price above, though when comparing it to other solar options, I believe Vortex Spark, their Spark Solar, is around the exact same price point on the street of around $220 to $250. So for solar red dots in the more budget end, it's very, very comparable. And of course, Holosun now anyways is getting a much better reputation of having very, very durable products. So other basic features, it's 6061 T6 aluminum, which is fine, not quite as strong as 7075, but much cheaper. It is hard coat anodized, kind of a matte black, which is nice. It's not glossy or anything like that. The finish has held up fairly well, as good as any other red dots. They are nicely recessed. The glass is nicely recessed inside of the optic body itself. So if you're slamming it forward or backwards into something accidentally or just have it on you, you're not going to be hitting that glass all that often. So here on the right side of the optic up front, we have two buttons. You have your plus and your minus for, of course, increasing or decreasing your brightness on your reticle. You have 12 different settings, 2 night vision, the lowest 2, and then 10 daylight. Now, it gets extremely bright, very, very bright. So generally speaking, I'm running it 2 or 3 clicks down from the max brightness when I'm outside, and then several more than that when I'm inside. So it's a very, very bright red dot. I do want to say that the battery life is listed as 50,000 hours with some other interesting features with the 2 MOA dot at setting 6. However, most people are probably buying the 500 series for the 65 MOA Circle, and when you add on that 65 MOA Circle with the hash marks in it, all that extra illumination drains the battery very quickly, so then you're looking at only a 10,000 hour battery life at setting 6. Now 10,000 hours is still very good. That is still over a year at setting 6. However, if you're using this mostly outdoors, you're going to drain that quite a bit faster than you think, because it's not going to really last that 10,000 hours. So theoretically, the battery life, the use time on this optic is actually somewhere between like 3,000 and 7,000 hours, depending on your batteries, where you live, all that sort of fun stuff. So that is something to note, that if you do use the 65 MOA Circle, and presumably if you're spending more money on the 500 series, you want that 65 MOA Circle, which is one of the only reasons to go upwards in price, in my opinion. It is going to drain your battery life quite a bit faster. Not a big deal though, as most people change their batteries every 6 months, every year, and they don't have a problem with it. Now, talking about the battery compartment on the 503CU is on the side of the optic itself, so it is a side loader, which does help somewhat to allow the optic to be a little bit more slim left and right. However, I do prefer having a easier to remove external battery tray. For instance, this battery tray is very, very small and requires a very, very small Allen key. If you do not have that Allen key on you when the battery dies, there is no way that you will be able to remove the battery unless you break the battery tray off. And again, because it is running that reduced battery life of about 10,000 hours, or less than that, again, if you're using it on any usable brightness level outside, it's going to be draining quite a bit faster. So I'm not a huge fan of the side loading tray. I know it is a little bit cleaner looking, you know, it's a little bit more elegant, I suppose, but not being able to access that battery without a tool is, in my opinion, kind of a downside. Now, moving up from the battery tray to the windage and elevation knobs, they are very well recessed. They are very low profile. They match with the quote-unquote armor that's on them. So they're very nicely protected, so you're never really going to hit them. Even if you tried, it would be very, very difficult to break these knobs off. The turrets, I believe, are half MOA or 1 MOA. Either way, it is a red dot, and it's not a precision rifle, so it's never going to be an issue in the normal ranges that you're going to be shooting a red dot in, 1/2 or 1/2 or 1 MOA will be just fine. And the last real notable feature on the outside of the optic anyways is going to be the solar panel on top. Now the solar panel can work in a couple different ways. When you get this optic out of the box, most of the time, as long as you're buying it new, I presume, it's going to be in what they call their auto mode. So it is going to auto brightness adjust depending on the level of light or the level of power that that solar cell on top is absorbing. Now what that means is when it's inside and it's not bright daylight outside and you're not near a window, is that it's going to be off. Now of course you can switch out of out of auto mode very easily and go into manual mode, and for 99% of people I would recommend immediately switching out of auto mode into manual mode so that that dot is as bright as it needs to be. Now if you do all of your shooting out in the desert and you have direct sunlight basically all of the time, auto is going to be just fine. It's going to be very, very bright for you. When I was using this outside and had direct sunlight, it was more than bright enough for any sort of situation, but I live in a very wooded, very rainy place where it gets overcast quite a bit. And so I don't want that dot dimming and brightening up on the fly without me telling it to do so, especially when generally speaking, I'm talking about a year or more of battery life. I'd rather just set it and forget it so it's at where I want it to be when I want it to be at it. So while I do think that the solar cell is cool, it's not really all that usable outside of a few more niche scenarios. For instance, if you do have this optic on and for some reason you run out of access to batteries, you're always going to have some sort of sighting option. If you have the light and the solar cell is working, you are going to have a reticle, and if it's not working, you can of course use your backup iron sights. So it is kind of a nice fail-safe in the event that you're never able to get CR2032 batteries again. You do still have a theoretical lighting option as long as the solar cell is working and still able to absorb energy. So now moving on from there, the last kind of notable technology feature is going to be auto on, auto off. Most of Holosun optics have them, not all of them. It has been very, very good. I have never noticed it. You can set it to either be different times, so you can set it from like 1, 2, 3, 4 hours or something like that, or you can turn it off. Now I've just left it on in its normal state just to kind of test it, make sure that it's working properly, that it turns on when you touch it, and every time that I bring it up, it has come on no problem whatsoever. So now that we've talked about the externals and the features, let's go ahead and talk about the glass. Now, the glass on most budget red dots is very, very good. The SIG Romeo 5, SIG MSR, Vortex Crossfire, Vortex Spark is all very, very clear with very, very minimalistic tint to it whatsoever. They're very, very crisp looking through them. I have mentioned this in other videos, but Holosun generally does have a more aggressive blue tint, a blue notch filter than other manufacturers, even though they do, of course, manufacture a lot of those other red dots. On their specific red dots, they do use a slightly more aggressive notch filter. So when you bring this up to your eye versus other optics, especially if you do it side by side, it is very easy to tell that they do tint their glass a little bit more. Now, whether that's to give their dots a little bit more contrast or to clean up the image a little bit, to extend their battery life, for whatever reason they do it, you do need to know that it is there, and it can be obnoxious in certain circumstances. For instance, especially when you're using a magnifier, because a magnifier, as its name implies, only magnifies. So if you have a blue tint or poor glass and you throw a magnifier behind it, you then just magnify that blue tint or that bad glass, and it makes it much more difficult to use in conjunction with a magnifier. So this is not my favorite optic to use with a magnifier on it. Funnily enough, the SIG Romeo 5, SIG MSR, Vortex Crossfire are actually much more pleasant to use with a magnifier because, again, they don't have that mildly obnoxious blue tint in them, though I do want to say that the Holosun 503C, it won't hold you back in any way. It just is something that I don't like to see in my optics, and I know the reasons why they do that is to give you other benefits, but if it doesn't have to be there for me, I would rather it just not be there. So that is a personal thing with the blue tint. If you do not mind the blue tint whatsoever, then the glass is still very crisp, very clear. It's still very bright. It's not dark glass or anything like that, so you're still going to be able to use it in low light, home defense, or just anything else that you want to use it in. Something else that I did notice when using using it with a magnifier is that when I have it in a 65 MOA circle, so if I go ahead, just hold down the minus button for 3 seconds to turn on the 65 MOA circle, when I have the 65 MOA circle up and I have the brightness up just a little bit too high, and then I throw a magnifier behind it, what happens is you get a lot of that red washout over a blue tint, and it makes your image very, very muddy in the magnifier, which is why most of the time, unfortunately, I was running it in the just 2 MOA dot so that I had less cluttering up of my dot, and especially using it with a magnifier, so I just had less stuff going on in my image. And a 2 MOA dot is very, very fast, very intuitive to use. There's a reason that it's on basically every red dot on the market. Now, that being said, having an option to switch between the 65 MOA circle and the 2 MOA dot is good. For instance, the 65 MOA circle, you can use the bottom hash mark as a hold at 5 yards, and you can also use that as a ranging feature. For instance, the normal human is like 5'6", 5'7", something like that. So at 100 yards, they should fill up the entire reticle. If they fill up half of it, they're at 200 yards, a quarter of it, 400 yards, and so on and so forth. So the 65 reticle option is a nice option, and I like that it is not permanent and you can switch to the 2 MOA dot, because again, I do prefer most of the time to just run the 2 MOA dot. Now, if I was running something like a competition or something like that, and there was a stage and it was all inside of 20 yards, like the 5 yard hold is going to be very useful, especially if you're doing a lot of really small, really close targets, where you don't have to just float the dot into nothingness. And having a little bit more of a circle to draw your eye to the center can be really good in high speed applications. But again, for most people, as long as you're to the same level of training as somebody else, you're not going to notice a speed difference in using the 2 MOA circle versus the 65 MOA circle. However, you will be able to see more of your image through your glass using just the 2 MOA circle. Now, it might seem that I'm being kind of a downer on the glass and the reticle, though I do still want to say that this is mostly just opinion. The glass is still good, it is still clear, you're able to take shots at long range with it, long range for red dot or long range according to your own personal skills. But I do find that the 2 MOA dot is actually one of the most crisp dots on the market. So when using it with a magnifier with just the 2 MOA dot, you get a very, very clean, very, very precise little dot to make your more precise shooting if you need to with a red dot. So I do like that. There's not a lot of bleed when you have it set to the proper brightness level for your environment. So when using just the 2 MOA dot, I do like the fact that it is one of the crispest 2 MOA dots on the market. So now, with all of that out of the way, let's go ahead and talk about the Optic's fatal flaw. And that is going to be the mount on it is not particularly good. Now, I've heard people say that, well, all stock mounts on budget red dots are all terrible. They all need to be switched out. That is mostly true. However, that is not entirely true. The Vortex Spark is actually a cheaper red dot and has a basically excellent mount. We'll get into the reasons why in its specific video, but I do want to say that there are budget red dots that do have very, very good mounts that are very solid and retain zero after drops. That's what we like to call foreshadowing. So the Holosun 503CU uses a very standard mounting pattern for the T1, T2, H1, H2, all that sort of stuff. So there are literally hundreds of aftermarket mounts, anything from $10 mounts all the way to $200-300 mounts that you can buy for your Holosun 503C. And I would recommend switching it out if you plan to use it for anything serious, which some people are, all of their guns are serious guns, some people have fun guns, range guns. So this isn't going to apply to everyone, but I do want everyone to be aware of it. So the retention method on the Holosun 503CU mount is very standard, like I said, T1, T2, so it uses 4 screws going up into the body of the optic, and the mount holds it in left and right, and there's also a recoil lug in the top of the mount so that the actual optic body locks very, very tightly into the top of the mount. That's all well and good. There's no problems there whatsoever. The problem is what attaches the mount to your rail. So the part that attaches to your rail is fairly identical to most other budget options. The Sig Romeo 5 and the other Holosun lines also all have very, very similar looking and featured mounts. So on the bottom here you have one Torx head screw that has a bolt and a locking piece on the other side that then clamps or tightens down against your rail. The first problem is going to be how small that piece is. So to make a mount hold better, you need more pressure, more even pressure, a larger surface area, and you can accomplish that in many different ways. So this has only pressure in one specific point, and that point is about a 1/2 inch long. So it does not have a lot of real contact because this whole side of the optic does not actually touch the rail whatsoever. Only this tiny little locking piece does. So you actually only have about a 1/2 inch of true tight contact surface on your rail, which is very, very small. And you're expecting this optic to hold zero after impacts, recoil, all that stuff off of a very tiny little piece of material right here. Now, the other problem is that they don't have any integrated recoil lugs. Now, the way recoil lugs should work is there should be 2 of them. There should be one to the high side and one to the low side of one of your Picatinny rail sections on top, so that it basically sandwiches in front and behind, so that it forces your optic not to move forward or backwards, and then the mount forces it to not move left or right, so it holds it in place to the rail. Now again, this does not have any locking lugs on the bottom of the mount, so that is going to mean that the only thing holding this optic to your rail is, again, this tiny little locking block piece right here. So I do want to say again that for most people this actually is not going to be a problem, and you're not really ever going to lose zero on a 5.56 gun. They just don't have that much energy to knock your optic out of place as long as you have it torqued down correctly. However, if your optic takes a tumble or a spill, and you guys know I always do a double drop test, so this is what this has been leading to. Basically, I did a double drop test and then shot another group at 25 yards and had it shift about 1 inch to the right, which means about 4 MOA of shift. Now 4 MOA is on the higher end of what I've seen for budget red dots. Generally I'm looking anywhere from like 1 to 2, maybe 3 or 4 on the high end, but generally speaking most good budget red dots, like even the Sig Romeo 5, which has a very similar mount, not identical but very similar mount, I'm looking at a little bit less shift in zero. 4 MOA will not make a difference in home defense distances inside of 20 yards, really even inside of 100 yards, not till you get out to distance 200-300 yards that 4 MOA starts to make a difference. If you miss a large target at 100 yards, it's not because your zero is off, it's because you suck. Now again, most people aren't going to be dropping their guns directly on their optics from shoulder height, but it is something that I do want to point out, that the mount is not going to take large sharp impacts and hold it zero. Now it shifted 4 MOA on me. If you give it a hard impact in a weird direction, it could shift even more than that. That is just the one sample size that I have. Now I do also want to say that the mount that attaches the optic to your rail actually managed to walk itself loose on this shotgun right here actually. This is a G-Force Arms imported Turkish shotgun, AR-12, whatever they call it. I had the 503C on here for about 100-150 rounds, and it managed to walk itself loose twice. Now I could fix that by applying some red Loctite to the single screw thread that holds it in place, but the problem with that is that I would not want to keep it on here for super long periods of time, as it's more of a testing gun right now. On top of that, I've also seen and heard of these optics, or the mounts, actually shearing in half due to low quality aluminum that they use in the mounts, because again they make millions of these mounts for a lot of different guns because they're basically all identical. I've heard of them breaking and actually shearing off, and I'll actually probably insert a clip of it if I can find it in here. Now again, it might seem like I'm really bashing on this optic, but really I'm more of just pointing out that the mounts in general on really budget guns are not that great, though again, not all of them. Some budget optics do have really good mounts that are good to go from the factory. It's just finding them is a little bit harder than finding ones that have very poor mounts like this. So for me, is the Holosun 503CU worth it out of the box? For me, not quite. Now, I don't really need a solar panel on top. I have lots of 2032s and I'm fine with switching them out every year or every other year. I also don't really need the 65 MOA Circle. So for me, the money might be a little bit better spent or saved with going with the 400 series lineup, the 400U lineup, if they have a 400U, so it has the covered up turrets that aren't super exposed. The 2 MOA dot, like I said, is very, very good. So as long as the 400 series has the same 2 MOA dot, it's still going to be a really, really good optic and save you about $100+ in some circumstances. Now, if I was going to use this optic for long periods of time, I do want to say that I put, again, about 150 rounds of 12 gauge through this optic, and I had it come loose on me twice. And then I had this on my 10.5 Roscoe for several hundred rounds, and then I also had it on this gun again for about several hundred rounds. So we're looking not quite 1,000 rounds, but approaching that point, and by the time we're done with it, we probably will reach about 1,000 rounds, because again, we're not done with this build yet. So for me personally, I don't think it's worth it for me as a very, very high value guy, and you guys know that that is basically my thing. I think that there are better optics for less money, or at least similar performing optics for less money on the market. That being said, the actual optic body itself is very, very tanky. It is very, very feature rich. So if it has all of those things that you need, that you want in an optic, and you find it for a good deal, it is still a good option. Though again, if you're using it for any sort of serious application, I would remove the stock mount. And we're actually going to be doing a series. I ordered 3 or 4 different mounting options for T1, T2 style red dots, from all the way from budget, like $10 mounts, all the way up to $100+ mounts. So with all of that being said, I think that it is a good optic. Like I said, it's feature rich. The actual optic body itself is very, very solid, very, very tanky. Has basically every feature you could want on it. I'm not a big fan of the side loading battery tray, as it's just a little bit more obnoxious for me, and I can't switch that battery out on the fly if I want to without using a tool like I can in a lot of other red dots. And again, if you want those features, that it just has all the features that you want, you like the solar, you like the multi-reticle options, you like the side loading battery tray, solar power, all that sort of stuff, then it is going to be one of the best value optics for all of those features. However, me and probably most people don't really need all of those things. So that being said, if you like it, awesome. I would recommend switching out the mount if you have some extra money to spend. If not, if it's just a recreational range gun, probably not going to matter to you. That being said, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed. Go ahead and, like I said in the beginning, like, share, and subscribe. All of that sort of stuff helps me out a ton. Comment anything down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.
We'll go ahead and put this one in.